let's see how this gets started here. All right, so to start things off, follow from that video was actually the footage from the sweeping summit. One of the most common questions I get asked, which is, why is the National Research Council studying curling, and why did you do it? So I actually have a question for you guys. When you heard, maybe when you read the description for the RockTalk, who here went, why is there a chemist looking at curling? Hands up, who did that? You don't have to feel bad, my mom asked, so it's all right. Actually, my entire family, my coworkers also did. I'm a recreational curler, so I knew a lot about the controversy last year. I heard about it at the club, I heard about it on TV, that sort of thing, but my background is a materials chemist. So you guys all know how disruptive the brooms and the sweeping techniques were to the sport. Well, my area at the National Research Council is in a portfolio called Security and Disruptive Technologies. My job is actually to create materials that will disrupt things in a positive way, to improve an industry, that sort of thing. So I'm used to testing and looking at materials to figure out what makes them better or worse and that sort of aspect. So that's where I am as a materials chemist. My colleague Louis, on the other hand, has a very different background. He's an ice physicist. He evaluates ice for sport. He was part of Canada's bobsled team, and he's evaluated ice for that and in curling in the past. So when I heard about the controversy, I ended up talking to Louis and I said, do you think we could do something, put this together? And he said, absolutely. I mean, NRC has a long history of evaluating sport and helping sport in Canada. So these are just some examples from our wind tunnel alone for what we've done for winter sport. So we've done the luges, the bobsled, the skeleton track, we've done speed skating, we've done skiing. We've looked at all of those. We said, well, why not curling? How can we help? So in doing that, we approached the Curling Canada and the World Curling Federation, and we sat down and said, well, how can we help? And we came up with, there were 3 key questions that really needed to be answered in conjunction with them. So the first one is, what is sweeping actually supposed to be able to do within the sport at the elite level? Next, is the sweeping technique, or is it the broom that's responsible for all of the issues that we saw last year? And then finally, if it is the broom, what product or collection of products do we need to have as we move forward? So that's where we're going to start. We're going to look at the first question. What is sweeping actually supposed to do? Because we realized going into the summit, if we didn't know that, what were we really going to evaluate? So let's start there. Let's look at what they did. So they actually surveyed, and I'm hoping most of you guys did the survey, a series of questions to both recreational curlers, junior curlers, elite players, member associations. They asked as many people as they could. So the very first question they had was, should sweeping be able to make a stone travel further? You don't really need to look at these numbers. Blue means agree. Huge majority of people said yes, you should be able to make a stone go further. On the flip side, should sweeping be able to slow a rock down? Overwhelming majority said absolutely not. You should not be able to slow a rock down. Now, I'm going to mention something. In Canada, I'm sure a lot of you here, you refer to them as rocks. The rest of the world calls them stones. Louis and I like to make the joke that the most complicated part of this entire process was learning to call them stones and not rocks. I will use that phrase interchangeably in this talk, but my slides, I believe, will say stone. Next, they asked, should sweeping be able to make the stone curl less? And overwhelmingly, people said yes. So you should be able to hold that line for a while. But interesting, when they asked, should you be able to make the curl more? There was clearly no consensus on that. So, all right, well, that's good to know. So the last one was, should you be able to make a rock fall back? So if you have it curling to the right, should you be able to make it curl left? And overwhelmingly, again, they said, absolutely not, you shouldn't be able to do this. So to kind of recap this, you should be able to increase the distance of your stone, and you should be able to delay the curl. But you should not be able to slow your rock down, and you should not be able to make it go backwards to its natural curl or fall back. Okay, so understanding that, we now knew what we needed to do to move forward. So with that, we thought, well, let's move to this next question. Okay, understanding what sweeping is supposed to do. Is it the technique being used or the broom that is responsible for that? So to do that, we have to look at the sweeping technique. So you guys are going to be very familiar with all three of these techniques. As junior curlers, you've obviously got your angle technique, which is very common when you do directional sweeping. You have the full face approach where you're 90 degrees to the motion of the rock. And then you have snowplow where you are parallel or 0 degrees. So the three. So we needed to look at all three of those and see what did and did not have directional effect with products. So how do we go about this? Well, there was three key things that we had. The first was athletes. We had 11 athletes from around the world. They were not just Canadian. And they were divided up into two teams, which I jokingly called them team left and team right, based on whether they swept on the right or the left side, and of their preferred side. These players can obviously do both. Next, I also wanted to know who they were sponsored by so that we could keep an eye on it, because I didn't want to have always manufacturer one only sweeping manufacturer one's products or their competitors. So we wanted to make sure that every product was tested possibly by someone who was and who wasn't sponsored by those products, just so that we had that as a background. Next, we wanted to know how effective they were as sweepers. So we used a product called the Smart Broom, where we could actually measure the force and frequency that they put on it. And then we divided the sweepers up within each team. So we have the really strong ones, and then I don't want to say weaker, but less effective. So we could make that comparison as well. So if a broom was swept with a heavy sweeper, that broom would only ever be compared to a different broom that was also swept with a heavy sweeper. You didn't want to do light versus heavy. You couldn't do that comparison, all right? And the last thing that we did with the athletes is we wanted to know their opinion. What did you think about this product? Was it in scope? Was it out of scope? Can you give us some feedback on it? But keeping in mind, it was their opinion and their feedback. But we used our science to make all of our decisions, but we wanted their feedback as we move forward, okay? One other thing that we use the athletes for is we had both Brad Gushu and Nick Eden at the summit, acting both obviously curlers, but primarily as skips. And we used them to help us understand where the break points were. We had lasers that would show us where the break points were, but we had them helping us tell the athletes when to sweep, because we had them sweep only from the break point to when the rock stopped. And we believed that they would be more effective at noticing and recognizing it than Louie and I, who are not obviously professional elite curlers, who are looking to do this on a daily basis. So we used that, but Louie and I could watch. We could see the laser and say, yes, we agree that that's when it was. Also, we had the double. If Brad was the one calling it, Nick evaluated when Brad did it. When Nick was doing it, Brad evaluated him, and we were all watching. So there was 3 people watching what was going on, at least, saying, yes, we agree, that is when the break point was. So that all of that was taken care of. Also, when any athlete was sweeping, the other athletes were watching them and saying, yes, they really were doing angle sweeping. They really were doing full face. They really were doing snowplow, so that everyone was checking in on everybody else. So that was for the athletes. Now for the ice. As you guys all know, ice eventually does get a bit of a dish to it. Well, our ice was prepared by professional ice makers who typically do international events, but they prepared it specifically flat for us, so that if you threw a rocket towards the 12-foot or the 8-foot or to the button, it didn't matter. The amount of curl would be identical across the sheet, okay? Next, when they threw rocks, we made sure that no rock followed the path of a previous stone. So in doing that, we then had rocks thrown to both approximately, depending on which one we were doing, the 12-foot and then to the 8-foot on both left, right. And at that point, that sheet was never used again until it was fully scraped, repebbled, nipped, and prepped again. So only 4 rocks per sheet, okay? And then, of course, we set up timers so that we knew how fast that rocks were going in immediate real time. So we had backline to hog and, of course, hog to hog timers. And we were matching those, okay? And then the laser that I mentioned. And the last part is the rock. We put sensors on the rock so that we could understand. So the first one is the ice positioning system, which is this guy here. There was components to it. So the first one was that we set up tags in the arena, in the rink, so that would then triangulate the position of where that rock was at any given time. So we had 3 of these around the room, but we needed to attach this to the rock. And this doesn't really come in a box. It also requires a battery to operate. And we needed to make sure that if it fell off, it didn't get damaged. So we had our incredibly high-tech container here. Louis designed this, so it's high-tech. It's just bubble wrap, where we would slide this inside here. And then this got attached onto the rock, as you can see here, because we needed the tag as close to the center of the rock as possible. So we did that. The other aspect is that the batteries that we use were lithium. And as we all know in Canada, your cell phones, when you take them outside in the winter, the batteries die really quickly, don't they? So we also had to include with this some pepper packs to keep the batteries warm so that they could last all day for us. All right? So that was the first thing. So this was our ice positioning system, so we knew at any point where that rock was. All right? The other one that we had on there, if I can just get this to stand back up, was, where did it, oh, here we go, was this device. This sensor has both an accelerometer in it and a gyroscope. So this tells us, again, this, by combining this data with this, we could tell how fast the rock was going and also how many times it rotated. Because I'm sure you guys all know, if you put a little turn on your rock versus if you really turn it a lot, that rock will behave differently. So when we were comparing products, those rocks had to be going the same speed initially, and they had to have the same number of rotations from beginning to end for us to actually say, yes, we're willing to compare that. All right? From that, I want to show you guys how this worked, what this looked like for us. So it's going to have to search and see if we can find it. So we're sending packets between here and my laptop, which is the same as what we did at the summit. If you think of this being put on the rock, you can completely move it, right? So who here wants to catch it? Anyone here? Oh, confirm reset. So you can see when he's touching it. See here how you can see that he's, so shake it for me. So you can see both the movement here, but you can see all the acceleration data. So not only could we tell how fast it's going, we actually realized looking at the acceleration data, we could almost pick it up as a signature as to who was throwing the rock. We could tell the difference between the athletes by just how they came out of the hack, by just the pattern of the acceleration of the rock that they had. But we could also, this was very easy for us to count the number of rotations, because we were concerned. We didn't want to have somebody going 1, 2, that wasn't going to be accurate enough for us. So we needed to have this. So this was the device that we used. But this is how we were able to do it. And obviously we didn't watch this through this, but we collected all the data so we could look at it afterwards. So now let's talk about what the actual results told us. So let's first look at angled sweeping, because everyone had really moved towards a directional sweeping. First of all, is directional sweeping true? Can you steer the rock? Most of us here already knew the answer was yes, but we had to have the data to prove it. So we had the athletes sweep with the now accepted product, everyone's favorite golden yellow broom, and we compared it to other products. And so this is just an example of an approved versus an unapproved. So just, I mean, we already know there's only one approved product now. So if you swept with the curl, with the approved product, your rock will end up in the house slightly where you want it. With the unapproved product, you can actually be as aggressive enough to have it curl so far that we had one of these products hit our hog line right at the wall, right there. We had a sensor set up there, it took it out. That's a huge difference, first of all. So certainly you can make it over curl. Again, now if you do the difference, sweeping against the curl. We had, in this case, of course, if you use the approved product, I'm going to use a laser pointer, it'll be easier for me. So you can see, so the approved product here, there's a difference. Now these are different runs, so you can't directly compare these. But, I mean, you were able to hold the line a bit, all right? But if you use one of the unapproved products, they could hold the line perfectly. So directional sweeping was definitely real. We could see that with some of these products. But what if we just change the sweeping technique? What if we go full face or snowplow? Can we make all of these problems go away? And can we go home? Which would have been a lot of fun. If you want to make elite curlers' life really complicated and make them mad at you, ask them to sweep full face. Perfectly 90 degrees. We spent an entire day. They did it for about 8 hours. They're like, this isn't natural, this doesn't feel right, but we're going to do it because you've asked us to, and so they did. They were champs for us. It was great. So snow plowing, they were able to hold the line with it perfectly. You see that there's next to no curl on this product, which you only should be able to delay the curl, remember? You shouldn't be holding the line based on the survey. And if they swept full face, the 90 degrees, it curled, but they slowed the rock down by a lot. They hogged it. Now, an elite curler hogging a rock, first of all, is kind of funny. And when that happened, when everyone was watching it, everyone went, but what were the times? Like, was it thrown badly? These rocks had identical velocities. They should have ended up at the same point. But by sweeping full face, they could slow the rock down, which again, the survey said you should not be able to do. So from this set of data, we now know regulating the sweeping technique was not going to fix all the problems from last season. There was more to it. It was connected to the brooms as well. So we now needed to look at how are we going to move forward. So that really brings us to this third question. What product or products are in alignment with the sport of curling? Is it one? Is it multiple? Where are we at, right? So you all know what the recommended product is. You're using it today, right? I mean, all three head designs, so the standard oval, the ice pad, the Lightspeed, they're all approved. They all have, I know it's your favorite color, the golden yellow, but it's the nylon Oxford 420D. And those are the components it has, but it does not have coating on the outside. There is no foil, there are no inserts, and there are no ridged foam. Okay? Now, we also looked at dimensions and this sort of thing, and I'll get into a bit of that later. This is what was accepted, but how did we get here? All right? Because I'm sure this is how you guys are going, well, why were you there? Well, let's start with fabric, okay? I'm going to use this as an example, but we looked at a whole series of nylon, Sportlight nylon, polyester fabrics. They're fabrics. We looked at a collection of them. If you look here, you just have, so the red line that you see here is the approved nylon Oxford. The other two are other fabrics. Now, you are going to see graphs like this throughout the talk. I'm sure you guys can't read the numbers because you don't need to. What you need to know is that this goes from here, where the data starts, is always 0, and this goes to 4 meters. And those 4 meters represent the house, so if you stretch out the house and really zoom in on that, whereas this here goes from minus 10 meters to 35 meters, so that's the full sheet of the ice. If we had kept these axes the same, it would have been really hard to see differences. So we've blown it up for this presentation so you guys can see differences across it. But as you can see here, this is just a whole series of data where they're absolutely identical. So we know for this fabric, I mean, the Cordura nylon, it seemed acceptable. So that's great. And that was true for all of these. So the Sportlight nylon, the polyester, they were all in scope for the sport. So we're like, okay, well, maybe there's a lot of possibilities. But there was one fabric that really stood out, and it was the Top Gun polyester fabric. So if you swept against the curl, so again, the red is the approved product that you guys use. And if you use the Top Gun polyester fabric on the same head size, everything about it is the same except for that fabric change, you could hold the line. There was a 2-meter difference in what you could do when that rock was same velocity, same number of rotations. That's the amount of difference. This is clearly well outside the scope of the sport, right? You went beyond, there's absolutely no curl there outside. So we knew this was not going to be moving forward. But these fabrics all seem to have some promise. So we continued on, but one of the things that you guys might not know is fabrics come in different weights or thicknesses. So if you think of it, you could have a really thin fiber, you could have a really big fiber like this, okay? And that's referred to as the denier of the fiber. So when you hear the 420D, the 420 means that it's 420 grams is how much 9,000 meters of that fiber weighs. That's what the 420 is about. So we ended up looking at fabrics from a series of them to see, did the fiber size matter? Or could we have had nylon, Oxford 200, 400, pick your favorite color, denier. Which one could we see? Well, we compared that. We looked at the 400, 600, and 1,000, and we picked those because those are what we had available to us at the summit. And if you look at this data, these are all done with the curl, and they all end pretty much, they all curled pretty much identically, right? These are stopping at the same point. But this, remember, this is actually a pretty big difference. These are stopping progressively. So the finest fiber is actually carrying the rock further. The thickest fiber is carrying it the least, based on this data set. But we at the NRC, when we looked at this data, we said, well, that's what this appears to suggest, But we don't want to say absolutely that a finer fiber does that, but it seems to suggest that. And so that's why WCF said in their regulations, well, you know what, it's safer for us to say everyone uses the same denier fiber, because then we don't have to worry about this being an issue. We want it to be the athleticism that determines how a rock performs, not the broom being used. So that's why you have the 420, okay? Next was fabric direction. And the reason we looked at fabric direction is during the summit, we had a couple of products that we realized seemed to be performing differently depending on how the fabric was arranged. So we looked at specifically the nylon Oxford, the approved fabric. And we actually had, the manufacturers were present there, and we had them make for us custom heads where they took and put the fabric perfectly one direction, so you can see here, and perfectly the other. And we tested them. So it has to do with whether the warp or the weave, whether it's parallel or perpendicular to your broom. So if you guys look at your broom, when you look at it in one direction, the pattern will look like you're seeing squares. And if you rotate it, you'll see that you have circles. It's kind of like an optical illusion for you. But when we did that, and we had them snowplow with it, because that's when we were actually seeing this difference with some of the other products, it was highly consistent. So it didn't matter. But they said to be careful moving forward, all manufacturers will make their products with the fabric in the identical direction, so that just in case, they know for sure. Next was head size, because as you all know, right now there's 3 approved head sizes. Does head size matter? Well, for the nylon Oxford fabric, it absolutely does not matter. You can use any of the 3 and they're consistent with each other. But those other fabrics that we said that were in scope, when we looked at those, what you can see here is the smaller head, you could actually increase. So this is the standard oval versus a light speed versus an ice pad. This one, the standard oval, you could take it further. Against the curl, they're different again. And so at that point, that was only true for those fabrics, not for the nylon Oxford. And so again, we didn't want to have one manufacturer over the other going, well, this is the difference between our products because of our size. No. So that's why, again, the nylon Oxford was selected, because you couldn't see this difference with size. Okay, but with these other fabrics, you could either increase the curl, you could increase the distance just by changing your head size. Not fair for the sport. Next, color. This is the one that surprised so many people. Does color matter? Absolutely. Sadly, but true. To give you an idea, this is an example here. We have identical products. The only difference is color. One is red, one is black, okay? If you swept against the curl, this is what the red product did right here. That was a 35% loss if you went from red to black. That's huge. I mean, we're looking at almost a meter difference in the amount it curls. That's a lot. Like, that's over 3 feet difference in curl by switching color. Here on the other side, in this case, and here we thought, okay, red versus black, is it a dark fabric situation, right? So we thought, well, let's look at colors that are more similar. So we looked at yellow and compared it to orange. And this shocked everybody. Yellow is the red trace here. Orange is the blue one. There is almost a meter difference when sweeping against the curl. Orange was more aggressive than yellow. And that confuses a lot of us. We're unsure as to why that's the case. There's lots of theories. But to be careful moving forward, the WCF said, it's best if we just say one color. Because yellow versus orange, a lot of people thought that would be comparable, right? But it's not. And it wasn't a surprise to us that black was different, because black, you can warm up. There's lots of logic there, but yellow versus orange. So there's talk about, is it different dye lots, this sort of thing. So that's also why WCF is keeping track of the lot information. It's a single supplier. Because if it is a dye lot situation, we can't have that being a difference, right? So we need to have everyone having the same. So this is where the color aspect really came in. Next was coatings. So as you guys know, some brooms have a coating on the outside, some have a coating on the back side of the fabric. So between the foam and the fabric, there's a coating there. So we wanted to know, how does this have an effect? We know that from an athlete's perspective, on one hand, they really liked the coating because it prevented that wet sock situation that quite often happens, especially if the ice is really frosty. But on the flip side, coatings were rubbing off. They then were changing over the course of the game. So then, well, what's really happening? Well, in this example here, if you compare the red trace that we have here, the coating is on the foam side, so the back of the broom, and the blue is where the coating is on the ice. And you can see you can actually, by having the coating on the ice, you can increase the curl by 45%, so it's much more aggressive. In this situation, same thing, so whether it's on the back or if it's on, the ice side, or whether it's on the foam side, and these colors are reversed now, because it was more aggressive, you could slow a rock down by as much as 20%. So again, that's a problem. And so that's why now coatings, they said, if it was going to come in contact with the ice, at elite play, they couldn't have that. And that would be a challenge, because now those brooms can get wetter because the coating's only going to be on the back, but they couldn't have this sort of situation happening with coatings and that changing over the course of the game. Because the elite players said they very much wanted the broom to perform in the first end and in the eighth end, or at the eighth end or at the end of their game, how many they're playing, the same. They wanted that to be the same. They wanted to know when they took it out of the bag that this was going to behave in a reliable way. And they knew with these coatings that wasn't going to happen because they evolved for them. Now, there were other components, as you guys know. Some brooms came with foam, like textured foam. So there were some ridges or ripples, depending on what you want to call it. Some had inserts, and there was also foil. So I'm just going to call those other components. I'm putting them in a big bucket together. Regardless of what component you added, in all three of these situations, the red trace is always a standard, so you don't have this component added. And if you added any one of these components, you had a dramatic change. So in this example here, when you added one of those components, you could increase the curl by greater than a meter. In this one, if you went against curl, it was greater than a meter again. And in this one, you could actually slow the rock down. So we're back to these directional effects, and this is why they've said absolutely these are all well outside the sport for elite play. So no more ridges, no more, well, there's no more ridges, no more coatings, no more foil, insert, they're all gone, okay? So with that, the last one was foam, because everyone's talking about foam. This one's harder, this one's softer, this one's thicker, this one's thinner. So with that, we wanted to first look at how hard the foam was. So there's this technique you can use, it's used a durometer, and we can measure how hard it is. And so we specifically did it on the Shore 00 scale. And regardless of the configuration, so whether you had a small broom, a large broom, any configuration, whichever one you've selected, if you look at the hardness values, 70, 72, 69, our instrument is plus or minus 2. They were absolutely identical with regard to hardness. Now, how do you put that in perspective, and why did we use the Shore 00 scale? So the Shore 00 scale, everything is achieved as soft or medium soft here. But a 70 on the Shore 00 scale is actually a 30 to a 35 on a Shore A, and it's below 10 on a Shore D. So that's why we had to be specific, and it gives you an idea. So a rubber band is less than 10, but it's a 30, but it's 65 to 70, to give you an idea. Whereas a shoe is way up here. So we specifically, when we're measuring these types of things, you had to pick the scale that's appropriate to the material you want, because you always want your numbers to be in the middle of the scale, not at the very extremes, right? So this is why we used this one to be able to measure it, and we were able to show that the heads are all consistent, that were approved, were the same in terms of hardness. But there's more than just that for foam. There's actually how much force it takes to compress it. Okay, so we actually measured, they call it the modulus of compression, which is a very high-tech term for how much force does it take to smush it a certain amount, all right? Well, I don't want to get into what the specific values are for that, because it's not going to be helpful for you. But what we came up with was that if you, those regulations are part of WCF's guidelines, but I wasn't going to get into it. But what I kind of thought I would mention to you guys is that we determined that moving forward, if you put 175 pounds of force onto your broom, it should not compress the foam more than 95%. And at 95%, there should be at least half a millimeter above the edge of the broom, all right? So that you always wanted to have something there, all right? And that also has to do with beyond 95% of the foam. The properties of the foam can change. It can become much harder, much denser, so we did not want to deal with that. We wanted to make sure that these products were all within a certain behavioral region, and that's why they are not allowed to go above these extremes, so that we do know that the modulus that we measured is true. So with that, I have to give a big thank you, especially to these athletes who worked so unbelievably hard. To give you guys an idea, the very first day of the summit, the athletes were on the ice at 9 a.m., and we let them go home at 9:30 that night. And they swept continuously except for a short break for lunch and a short break for dinner. consistently the entire day. So it was a very long day of curling for them. Also, I obviously have to thank the World Curling Federation and Curling Canada for all of their help. Our amazing team of ice makers, they joked, they were like, I just prepped that sheet for you. You only put 4 rocks on it. They redid the sheets every single time we asked. They were amazing. And even if they had prepped a sheet and we determined that ice had sat for too long, they would re-prep it for us. So I have to give massive kudos to them. We also had a team of curling experts that were there to provide guidance for us, information. They worked as flagmen for us, helping document all sorts of things. I have to give a big shout out to them. Also to Anne Swisshelm from the Athletes Commission, who was really good, I trusted her to come and say to me, that athlete needs some Gatorade. I need you to hold the experiment. Can you run this one instead? I want them to have a break. She kept an eye on every one of those athletes for us because I couldn't tell when an elite athlete was getting tired, but she was really good at seeing that. Over lunches and dinners that I had with these athletes, over the 3, and actually I was with them for about 5 days, I said to them, when we get to the end of the summit and we get to the product or products that we think that there should be, do you think that there will be a change in the sport? Do you think that there will be players that were, and whatever level they're talking about, we're really highly ranked, do you think that there will be a big change and that sort of thing? And the players, they all had the same answer for me, no matter who I asked, and they said, for the players who focused on their technique, their game will not, how they play the game will change when you take away directional sweeping from them, but the really good players that have focused on their technique will still be the best players out there. And so if they continue to practice doing that and they never forgot about doing it, are the ones that will succeed. So with that, focus on your technique.
Awesome. Thank you so much.